very visual scenes. Yes, I promise. Yeah, well, first of all, I would like to thank Peter and the other organizers for inviting me again. I'm a proud participant last year, so it's great to be back at ISC. So this is a, yeah, louder? Oh wow. I don't know, I have control over that. This is as close to my... I'd be happy to use a mic too, yeah? If that helps. Here it sounds very loud, but maybe not there. I can stay here, either way is fine. Okay, yeah, Okay, yeah. Okay, so I'll stay here. Is that better? Okay, that's very good. So, first of all, I would like Rodrigo has done. I would like to encourage you to ask questions. And this was a good question, so please ask away. And if we don't get through the last slides, that's perfectly fine. So this is I've been recycling this title here for many years because I like it. And I will also be recycling a part of what I've done last year in Bangalore. And some other things are very new. They literally from last month. And I thought this might be a good opportunity to present it and get some feedback. And if possible, shoot down my ideas so that I don't have to waste time following them. So this is somewhat experimental at this point. So what this is about is I'm going to talk about selective attention, which I believe is a very central part of perception and cognition in all animals certainly beyond insects. So it's well known that insects have already mechanisms of selective attention, and even some of the fundamental mechanisms that are very interesting, but I won't go into here, seem to be similar in the implementation of the algorithms seem to be similar between mammals and insects, which I think is quite remarkable, but I'm not going to talk about that. So I will talk quite a bit about the first part, why animals have attention, and this is for the neuromorphs, for the engineers. This is not, you could probably understand that if it's important for pretty much everything that lives, at least animals that move around, that this is also mechanisms that is not only interesting for biology, but also for technology. So it turns out that the more complex and sophisticated our machines get, the more you have need for attention. And I'm not going to talk about that at all. I'm focused on logical mechanisms, but I believe that many of the problems that attention solves are just as important in technology, so also for engineers. So that's my first part, and my second part is I try to make you experience yourself the effect of attention, and the third is I'm going to talk about computational models, and I will stay, for reasons of time, I will stick with one model, the original model that is quite dated now, but it's still, I think, useful, and it's a basis for many other models. So that's the plan for today. So what do we mean by selective attention, just from a point of view of functional definition, without getting at this point into the mechanisms? So the problem is something that predates the the internet by about 500 million years, and that is information overload. It's not that only since we have social media that we have too much information, more than we can digest in a reasonable way. But this problem exists, as I said, since at least the first insect came crawling across the Earth. And why do we have the problem? Well, it's not really a problem. It's a result of the solution of a different problem, and that is that, well, life is dangerous. So we need to, on the one hand, we need to have senses to find food, find mates. On the other hand, we also need to have senses that tell us what to avoid. So, because each of those is crucial. If I don't find a mate, my dreams are lost. If I starve, I die. If I get eaten by a tiger, I starve. So it's important to have lots of information about the world. The problem that this creates, if I start adding senses upon senses upon senses, there's way too much information coming in, because typically these senses do their job. They are senses, but they are stupid. They are just sensing the temperature, whatever, at the position of my elbow, because at some point, if I happen to touch something hot, I need to know what, because otherwise I get burned. I don't want to do that, because I get an infection and die, and my dreams are lost again. So I need these senses here, but 99.9% of the time, the temperature at my elbow couldn't be of less interest to me. Okay, so I have the onslaught of sensor information that is coming into my brain, into my central nervous system, which is way more than we can process in detail. And in 99.99% of the time, we are simply not interested in this, so we have to discard it quickly. And this process of discarding unneeded, superfluous information is what we call functionally selective attention. Okay? All right, so far? So we can get an idea of how much information. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. We have information theory to do that. So we can treat our sensor input as a communication channels, and since Claude Sherman in the 1940s, I think, we know how to compute that. We formulate the problem in terms of yes/no question. Is this information there? Is it not? That's a binary decision, and we can count how many of those we do. Of course, we call it bits, and we can then apply, for example, to our visual input. So in primates like us, we have about 1 million cells, retinal ganglion cells in every eye, and those are the last stage in the retina. There's about 100 times more senses overall in the photoreceptors overall in the retina, so it's already a reduction 100 to 1. But what is relevant to the brain is only the output of the retinal ganglion cells, because none of the other cells project to the brain. It's only pre-processing, if you want. So we have 100 million cells, and they are retinal ganglion cells. They are spiking cells. They have to, because there's a long way from the retina to the brain, and so they spike, and we can count the spikes, and we can do statistics on the spike if we are careful about that. So every spike is either there or not, binary event. So that is one bit of information, and then if we just, as a very rough estimate, if we just look at how many spikes a neuron can produce, as Rajit already said, it's on the order of tens of hertz or so. Let's call it 100 hertz. Then we have 100 times per second. There's either a spike or not, so that gives us 100 bits per second. And we have, as I said, 1 million retinal ganglion cells, so that, and so that gives us the numbers that you see on the screen. So we have per eye and per second, you have an input from the visual system of about 100 megabits per second. 100 times 1 million bits per second. And of course, we make some assumptions that the resonant ganglion cells are independent, which turns out to be usually the case. So that is a large amount of information. Now, that is way more that can be processed in detail, and so we need processors to suppress that which is not relevant at any given time. For example, if you're staring at this black surface here, there's not much useful information right there, so that can be discarded right away, and many other things. And we will get quite a bit of detail into how many. This is actually the new part that I thought about quite recently. So this is what we call selective attention. This process of sifting through all the information and extracting the most relevant and discarding everything else. Now, is that okay so far? Okay. So I was a bit sloppy there because I talked about communication channels and all that, and of course this is the capacity of the channel, and I just talked about the frequency with which neurons can generate spikes and send information to the brain. But in reality, of course, if you look a bit more carefully, you have to look at the statistics of the spike trains, and if they all fire at the same time, or in a very repeatable pattern, then the information is very minimal. So, but you can use it, of course, and so the equation or the entropy comes a bit later in the equation. So if you do that, then people have done it in all kinds of systems. It turns out that the capacity of the channel is usually being used. So if you look at the statistics of the spike trains from the fly, the cat, and various primates, you get an actual rate of information transfer on the rate of tens to hundreds of bits per second. Okay? So it's not just the theoretical capacity of the channel that is there, but it's the actual capacity in bits per second that is transmitted. It's probably not surprising, because if nature could make it more efficient, it would be, because spikes are costly. So it's not surprising that nature uses the capacity of the channel to its fullest. Okay, so this number is solid. Okay, so why do we have that? I already said our brains are not equipped to deal with these very large amount of information, so we need to scale it down, and this is by no means a new idea. In some ways, this goes back to at least the 1800s. William James, as one of the most famous quotes in the attention literature is due to William James. I don't have it here, but the selection takes place is old. What is newer, and from the previous century, is that people started to at least think in conceptual terms of formalizing this process. And so there's a famous paper from Broadbent in the 1950s, on which many other papers have been built, and he formulated, at least in terms that are more familiar to us, in the words of William James in the 1800s. So we have limited capacity. Selection selects a small portion of the incoming information, so the rest never gets to the point of where the sensor input is being processed in cognitive computations, and this is how we prevent system overload. So if you want a graphical representation of this process, people talk about the attentional bottlenecks or sensor input, and that is whittled down to a much smaller part, and the processing in the more central parts of the brain happens only on those parts. So now becomes a new part. that as I said, I just thought about that for a little bit over the last month or so. Can we get an idea of how drastic this selection process works? So by how much of the information does survive the attentional selection process before it arrives in the central part of the brain. Okay? So this is, we know, it's pretty straightforward. As you saw, and I just did it here by waving my hands a little bit. We got to the input in the order of 100 megahertz per second per eye. Turns out that the somatosensory system is about the same. Auditory is a lot smaller because there are several degrees of freedom less nerve fibers going to the brain, and then you have tactile chemical sensors and all that. So that part we have pretty much under control. We also have a pretty good idea from various sources about the output of the brain and the complexity of your behavior that you generate. But the question is, can we get now an idea of how much of this filtering process is how dramatic this filtering process is. So, excuse me. So, this is the idea. So we have a communication channel that is in this shape here, where we have this this whittling down, but there's this one channel. The question is what arrives at the next stage, and the idea is that by Shannon's inference theory, a channel cannot generate information. It can only, the best if you have in that sense an optimal communication channel, it's one that preserves every single bit. But in this case, we do not want to preserve it. We want to get rid of it. But in any case, we can reduce it to zero if you want. We can not shut it off. But we can never generate additional information. So if we know the capacity of the inner part, the part in red here, of the central part, if we know the information flow in that part, that gives us an upper bound of how much information is transmitted through the previous parts. Okay, so that is, we know, well now, pointer would be useful. So we know this, we just computed it. We want to know how much is in this part, and that the information flow in the red part, in the central part, will give us an upper bound of the information flow coming in that part. Does that make sense? As you can tell, it's the first time I'm talking about that. That's probably not the most. So this one, yeah.
So this assumes that all the information of interest is coming from the sensory side.
Yes.
But I mean, there are all these theories that a lot of processing happens top down, and there's a prediction, and you're essentially dealing with prediction error and so on. So there's some stuff coming from other side as well. Are we accounting for that?
No, because selective attention is it's a process of selecting information from the senses. Of course, there are top-down influences that enter into the central processing part, and in some cases they may interact in a top-down way with the senses themselves. Auditory is one example. There's feedback to the ears, but there's no feedback to the eyes, except that you can move it, that you can move your head, you can make saccades, but there's no feedback to the 100 megabits per second. This is it's not influenced by any top down.
So this is only applicable to the very first stage of attentional selection.
Well, it's applicable to the input from the sensory surface, yes.
But,
And
I mean, a hierarchical structure and you have attention operating at multiple scales. So you can use this only in the first stage, right?
Very, yeah, you're right. So there's bottom-up attention, there's top-down attention, and you're absolutely right. It does apply only to the to that information coming at this level, and of course you can focus, like in the cocktail party effect, for example, you can focus on your own voice or on your own name or something like that, and that would likely happen much later in the probably somewhere in the entrance of the semantic stages in the central process. Yes, correct, absolutely. Thank you. Very good imitation. Oh, thank you. Perfect. Yep, good. Any other questions? Okay, good. Okay, so what that means is we want to get a, if we want to do that, what we need is to get an estimate of the information flow in the central part, and then we can conclude that is the upper limit. All right? Everybody okay with that? That's a central point here. Okay, so how do we compute that? Well, the entropy, I suppose everybody is familiar with that. So we have a set of actions, and these are actions in this case that are not motor actions. So these are mental processes. So like, for example, I'm thinking of one thing and not of another thing, so that's one action. And I am the next slide? No, but the slide after that, we will go through several examples of what these actions can be. But this, of course, this equation is valid for every, it's very general. So we compute the sum over all actions, also of the expectation value, of the logarithm, of this is log 2 of P of A, of course, sorry. Where is it? This is supposed to be P of A, of course. Okay? Definitely, I mean, entropy. And now, that sounds like a very straightforward way. There are some caveats, and that is, of course, it was very, very straightforward. I could do that again with waving my hands, talking about the retina, because we have the spikes, with the statistics of the spikes, so that's very easy. Each of them is a yes-no decision. Human behavior, like me waving my hands, is much more complex. There are many more things involved, and we don't have necessarily binary decisions readily available. And it's more complicated even, because if we do something like that, for example, what is the complexity of me scratching my head? There's many ways you can see this as an action that we plug into our equation. One is, well, is he scratching his head or is he not? That would be one bit. But you could also say, well, that I can do it like this. Maybe I want to distinguish it from doing like that or from that. So the exact way that could be done might be considered a different action. Okay, and even if I do that, the question is, how do I characterize a trajectory? Do I measure the trajectory in units of millimeters or micrometers or whatever you want? Okay. So in action, this equation seems very simple, but if you actually want to plug in actual probabilities for the actions, you have to be very specific what the actions are, and the entropy, as this example with the millimeters and micrometers shows, the entropy will vary with what you consider different actions. Okay. So now I'm going, and this train of thought is actually from a paper that I cite on the next slide only by Josie Zhang and Marcus Meister. The solution to this conundrum Do you use millimeters? Do you use micrometers? Do you use only the scratching head? Yes, no. What do we consider an action? The solution of that is that we focus on what we consider the actual action that we feel is a central cognitive function. And so many of these things, they are not even, for example, how exactly the muscles are controlled, are not even under central control. We have, many of these things are performed by the motor system, which we do not consider part of the central constraint. The idea is that maybe I feel an insect, and then I start scratching my head, and that is everything else. I don't have to think, move hand, now left, now right. I feel something, and the action that needs to be done is this. Okay? And so it's much more like, in this case, it's much more like a yes-no decision. Scratch your head, yes, no. Okay? So, more formally, so we define the task, the thought process that we are interested in, that is in the central part of the brain, and then we define as single only those that contribute to solving the task. Okay? And the variations, do I do this like this or do I do that? That is irrelevant. That is noise, because more likely than not, next time I scratch my head, it's just I could do this way or that way, but it's still the same action. Okay? So another example is for noise. Another example is you want to test the output of the system by having somebody type a text. So you give somebody a text to write down, and then you compute the entropy of this process. Okay? So now, typing in text is a sequence of pushing the right buttons, the right keys on a keypad, and again, it's a question of granularity. Do you care whether it takes 95 or 96 milliseconds to press a key? In some cases, it might be, but not if you're interested in this task. How fast can a person type, or this specific person type? You're only interested in is the key pressed or not? Is the correct key pressed? And the details we don't care about. So that is noise. If somebody pushes the button at one point at 95 milliseconds, and the next time the person pushes the button at 98 milliseconds, it's still the same action. And the rest, the details are noise. Okay? So, and then now we define the actions in our entropy equation in terms of what is relevant for the task. And that now we can do. And then we can apply this to many different cognitive tasks. So, this is again from Liu Zhang and Markus Meister. They did that. Actually, they read the literature. So they found all these tasks, and to begin with, it turns out that and this is nothing new at all. I don't know, probably 40s people started to look at performance of people. They found that a skilled typist types, I forgot the number of words per minute, but if you look at the distribution of key presses, you can compute that it is 10 bits per second. And this is less than you would get from when you multiply the number of keys on a keyboard and look at the combinations that you have, because this applies for actual English text written. It probably is very similar in other languages. Because there's regularities, and if you give somebody to type random sequences of characters, it is way less. Okay, so this is for skilled typist typing in English text, assuming this person was trained in English. Okay, so it's 10 bits per second. That's for skilled typist, which does not seem like a lot. okay, compared to 100 megabits per second that they get into their eyes while they're looking at the page they are copying, that is very little. So you might say, well, typing is something we are not exactly, we haven't evolved for. We have the motor system and we have fingers and all that, and that's very slow. That's probably a constraint in the motor system that makes it 10 million times slower. But let's look at another example, that is, look at a channel that has evolved for communication in humans, and that is speech. Well, it turns out if you go to a seminar that trains you to be a good public speaker, they say at least the number is 160 words per minute is the optimal frequency of words. If you go too fast, way more than that, people don't understand you anymore. They can't process it. Okay, so that turns out, again, looking at the statistics of the words in the English language, it's 10 bits per second. Okay, so the thing, the third, now it gets a bit more exotic, because even the vocal cords and our speech system uses a motor system. Admittedly, one that is optimized probably for communication, but it still there's a motor action involved. So what some people did, they tried to look for tasks that are pure thought, that do not involve any motor part. Okay, and the first one I want to talk about is blind speeded cubing. As I said, it's a bit obscure. You know the Rubik's Cube, right? You have the cube, you have to get it into position, and people have been doing this, not surprisingly. Humans are very competitive, so there are competitions for that. So there's speed cubing, where you do it, they give you a cube, you have to put it in the shortest time possible back. But of course, that's also a motor action, so that's where the blind comes in. So it's a subset of these competitions where you have to do it blind. So what you do is they give you the cube in random order, whatever they prepare it for, and then you have as much time as you want. You look at it and you can turn it, but you just look at it. You don't move anything, and then after that they blindfold you, and you have to bring it back as fast as you can. And I don't know if I interpret the thing. Turns out that the world champion in that competition does the whole thing, including looking at in about 12 seconds. So there's two important things. One is, of course, you can compute. In this case, it is really random within the constraints of the mechanics of this cube that you start with, and you can compute the number of possible combinations. It's a huge number, but it turns out in 6 seconds, which is the time that the best people need to look at that, you have 10 bits per second. So you have the total of 60 bits possible combinations for all the possible combinations that can occur. Okay? So that's one thing. Again, 10 bits per second, purely thinking about it. Okay, no motor action involved. So that's one thing. Same number. I mean, all these numbers are approximate. Some are 12, some are 9, some are the highest is, I think, was 13 for all of the examples that I have here. So they're all order of 10 bits per second. The second thing about this blind speeded cubing example is that you might think that if the motor system were the limitation, you would think that they would plan a lot more time to doing the motor action, finally getting it into the right shape again. That is not the case. It turns out it's about 50%. So they use 6 seconds to look at it and contemplate what am I going to do, and then they use 6 seconds approximately to do the thing. So it looks like there's not really a mismatch between the internal mental processing and the actual motor actions. Okay? Let me skip over the next one. So in this paper, I have 5 here. I skip over that one just for the interest of time. And the last one I want to talk about, because it's not that exotic, and it's again an example. The second one that I skip over is for memory formation, how you memorize a very complicated set of information. The third one is purely imagining, thinking, if you want, and that is something that probably most of you have played, the game of 20 questions, or I tell you, think about something, and then I have 20 yes/no questions, which is 20 bits, of course, with which I have to guess what you thought about. Okay, so it turns out that again, if you think about it for 2 seconds, that is again, if it's 20 questions for 2 seconds, that's 10 bits per second. Okay, and again, no perception involved, no model involved. Okay, so this goes actually beyond what our goal was. Our goal, if you think back like 2 slides or so, our goal was only to find the width, if you want, of this communication, of this central processing in terms of bits per second. That is the power of our communication channels. The last examples that I showed you is they go beyond it, because it shows that even if you have no obvious sensor input, in the last example, for example, you're just thinking about it without any input, close your eyes, when you try to come up with whatever, the elephant or something that you want to have people to guess. So this is a more general constraint than we even need for our specific questions that we are asking. Because remember, what we want to do is we want to deduce, but now we have it nearly done, we want to deduce how much information is being used in that channel, because it tells us how much information is provided to the channel after it has gone through the filter of selective attention. Okay? So this is a much more general limitation that we have than is needed for our purpose of investigating the width of the funnel of the filter given by selective attention. So, okay, questions? Yeah?
In the 20 questions, this is a modified version of 20 questions where you don't get feedback. Is that correct? Because in 20 questions, you ask the question, and then when you get some feedback, and that changes the next question you ask.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, but I mean, the feedback is irrelevant for this, because what you do is you think about something, and if you don't cheat, I hope you don't, if you think about, okay, I'll think about a mother elephant, something like that. This is what you think, and whatever the question, the feedback you get, it will not change what you originally thought about.
Okay, yes, so this is answering the question. Okay.
Yes, okay. Okay, other questions? Yeah.
Mathematical model for how does this selective filtering works for all the sensor input that we have? How does that really filter something?
I'm not sure exactly whether that is what you want, but I will present a computational model for the process. Is that what you are looking for? Yeah, we'll talk about that. Okay? Yeah. Yes.
If I deduce that you have a bottleneck or you have a constraint that the system, information system that you're having in brain can only process 10 bits per second.
Yes.
And then the nature and the biology did the reverse engineering and did this attention sort of filtering so that you don't lose information, you don't lose your life, you survive in the wild. Given the constraint that this 10 bits per second was something that
I'm not quite sure what you're asking. Can you? I mean, so yes. So what they claim, saying in master, is that our central processing is limited to 10 bits per second. And
So the question that I'm asking is, was this attention mechanism
yes,
came before that there was some form of information bottleneck, or is it that this information bottleneck was there and then the managing was why did this attention filtering?
when you say before, do you mean evolutionarily? I don't think there's an answer to that. I mean, it must, and this is the way it evolved, and it had to evolve that way. Because why we have this constraint, I talk about that in a minute. It's basically, as a preview, we don't know. And it's very surprising, in fact. But if this exists, then we have to have a very massive filter from 100 million to 10. And that evolved over time. But it's pretty clear that it did not all of a sudden, we dealt with 100 million bits per second and then we had to abruptly go down to 10. That's pretty high. Okay? Yes?
These numbers are for the best case. These are like the blind tuning
Yes.
case. That's for a person who already is very efficient.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
If you take an average person who has, then this 10 bits per second may not.
Absolutely. So that's but this is the upper limit. That is the best of the speed cuber, that's the world champion. So you and I, if we do speed cubing, I don't think we are I mean, I would be at 0.00001 bits per second because it would take me probably minutes.
Why are you thinking of this as a bottleneck? This is more like an efficiency, right? So which is that this person has become very efficient. So this person has to transmit only 10 bits per second. Very few number of bits because that person can process. Maybe this goes back to the predictive coding thing.
Yes. Okay. So one way. Okay. Yes, you're right. You could have infinite bits per second. For example, if a person had memorized, I won't say 10 to the 150 or something, whatever the number is, all the possible combinations that exist on this thing. If a person had memorized every single one of them, then it would be yes, no question. Is it this one or is it another one? But that seems very unlikely. I mean, and it's not only that they have to memorize it, you have to memorize how to get from this, one of the, whatever, 10 to the whatever number of possibilities. You have to get the right combination of movements that you generate. It's theoretically possible, but it's kind of, then computer science doesn't need to exist. You have a lookup table for everything in the world, and then every solution is solved in a nanosecond.
The last point about thinking or imagining, why is it only done for 20 questions? Why not more questions?
Why not more questions?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a game. The game is 20 questions. And if you want to invent a game with 40 questions, you can do it. But I would imagine that there's a reason why there's 20 questions. Probably it's if you have 2 questions, nobody will ever figure it out except by dumb luck. If you have 50 questions or 100 questions, then probably the game gets tedious and boring because everybody will find it out. Right? I mean, you want to have, basically, if you play this kind of game, you want to have something where it's not, where the outcome is not trivial. If everybody, if nobody gets it, if everybody gets it, then it's not a game. Yeah.
Not sure why, where attention comes in this. It seems like these numbers are driven by evolutionary, how many actions you need to do to survive in the world.
Absolutely.
And that's not probably too many, and that's where these numbers
Yes.
come from, right?
Yes.
So it has nothing to do with the input that needs to be
Yes.
processed or attention
Okay.
for that matter. It's driven purely
Yes.
by the fact that you don't need to do too many things at the
Yes.
same time to survive, right?
You're absolutely right. So that's why I made my remarks. It was maybe a bit lost. That's why I said the memory formation. Well, memory formation there is it has to do with card games or the motor component, but in the perception part, the blind, the speed cubic, the thinking, imagining, that is not really lots of sensory information involved. Okay, you're absolutely right. However, remember, our goal was how does attention come in? We assume that all of these require mental processing, thinking, cognitive processing, and that we also do this when attention is involved. And the purpose of attention is to limit the input to this unit, the central processing unit that does all this. Okay, are we on the same page?
That's where I have a difference here, that you don't really need attention. Your input space can be very large, like the input node of a network.
Yeah.
The output space is limited by how many actions you need to do to survive. And you may not actually need an attentional mechanism in order to bring it down. It could be that you're processing everything without actually filtering out stuff, and the output is what you get.
Yes. So, however, let's look at the first thing, order task. There we have input, visual input. There's a page that I need to copy. Okay, and so I need to pay. That goes through my attentive filter. Okay, and then it goes to the part that generates the right response and puts this key at that time, this key at that time in the right sequence and all that. But it has to be filtered to be at the same level as the 10 bits per second that this process, the central process, can manage. Okay? So remember even though we do many other things, the way we have a channel that in the task that does use attention, like for example the first one or the second one, we use a task that ends up feeds into a channel that has this very severe limitation, 10 bits per second. And since communication channels, like the whole system, cannot generate new information, so the capacity of this channel that we have here, the central channel, is 10 bits. So therefore, this is all that is remaining from the very large number of bits that comes into it. So remember, our task is to see how, by what factor, selective attention reduces the amount of information that is passed to the channel. So we know it is at the channel it is 10 bits per second. So now we know that we go from 100 million to 10. Okay? You want to talk later about it? Okay. Yeah.
One way to address Satyadeep's question on evolution and Supratim's question on motor-based information processing is to look at it from a more cross-species perspective.
From what?
Across species.
Okay, yeah.
So even say, for instance, chemotaxis in bacteria, sensory information that comes over there, or say, for instance, if it is based upon motor, does a cheetah, which runs at a much faster speed, does it have this constraint to be different from primates, let's say?
Yes.
That would be one way of addressing it. I'm not necessarily sure if it's purely addressable from one species, one primate subspecies kind of a perspective is what I think.
It's an excellent point, and you may well be right. And actually, Jake and Marcin do address it. They say that basically the title of the paper is something like, "Why do we live a slow life at 10 bits per second?" And they do say, I mean, it may be because this is all we can afford. It may well be that the cheetah has a higher bit rate per second. bring some arguments why that is not the case, because they don't talk about cheetahs, they talk about a fast-flying insect. And people have measured it, and it is actually, in that, turns out to be that it is on the same order of magnitude, but that doesn't mean that it has to be like this. The other example they bring is a snail. A snail is probably slowly moving. It might be even lower for them. So I don't think there's a claim that this is a universal constant of nature or something. That is something that all these examples are for humans, it may be different in other animals.
And I also agree with Supratim that, I mean, especially if we are going all the way from the sensory to the motor end,
yes.
There are additional pieces of information, quote unquote, coming from
yes.
memory and other things.
Yes.
There is the emergence at each and every scale, the complexity that comes into picture.
Yes.
So the traditional way of computing information from only purely
yes.
a sensory perspective might not hold over here.
That is absolutely true, but it makes the problem worse, because it's no doubt there's memory effects, but they also need to go through that. So there's even less space for the filtering of the sensory input, because there may be other inputs like memory or other compound inferences that should be mentioned. So it only makes it worse. Yeah.
I heard a couple of talks, most of them went over my head. They somewhat undermine the concept of using like bits per second or Shannon's information theory for that. Because Shannon's information theory talks about information broadcasting.
Yes. Channels, communication channels, yes. Mm-hmm.
So, and even he says, it's just for that. Don't expand it any further, and read it. And one example of why it doesn't really hold here is that the sensory information is adaptive sensing. So sensors change their behavior according to attention or other higher processing.
Not the eyes, nor the somatosensory senses. I mean, they are the only, I mean, that I can think of. I mean, the ear is a clear example. I mean, the inner, I think the outer has, let's correct me if I'm wrong. One of them gets feedback, but that's a small channel. That's like a few percent of vision. That's 20,000 versus 1 million.
The ears do have this threshold changing on different levels.
In audition, but that's 2% of vision as far as.
And with the vision, you do have the saccades and microsaccades that are constantly shifting according to attention.
Of course, yeah, but I mean, at a given time, the retina gives 100 megabits per second every time, and whether I saccade here or not there, it's always 100 megabits per second. Doesn't matter. Right.
Again, not me. The people I heard talking, they would argue that.
Okay.
They were very angry about
They're going to.
approach for information.
I'm sure they are going to be the reviewers of the paper when I submit it. Yeah.
So I have a question from the systems perspective. Like, we take an example of a standard plane-based perception. Let's say you have a conventional camera. That it makes sense if you can, if you apply selective attention mechanism, then you need to process less data, come back to all the pixel data that you get. But let's say if I'm already using an event-based sensor.
Can you speak more slowly? I have a hard time. My hearing is not the best.
So I'm saying that if I'm using a conventional perception system, like a frame-based camera, something like that, that it makes sense to use the selective attention mechanism, because you need to process very less amount of data compared to the whole pixel type. Like if I want to do some sort of a processing task, I do not use the whole data, camera data. I only need to use a selected portion of the attention mechanism that is coming. But if I'm using an event-based sensor, what more addition can I get by using this technique?
Event-based sensors. I mean, our retina is an event-based sensor.
No, I'm saying that if I want to use this selective attention mechanism,
Yes.
With in combination with the event-based sensor.
Yes.
What more addition or what more indications can I get?
I don't think that the argument depends on whether it's frame-based or event-based. It's just the argument is only about the amount of information that is coming in. And I mean, for the 100 megabits per second, I mean, you can, whatever, you pick your resolution, your frame-based sensor, and that gives you the frame rate. In your event-based, you have a number of events, which is probably 100 million per second. But I don't think that it has anything, it doesn't change anything in the main argument, because it is bits per second. Okay? Maybe I misunderstand that. We shall talk more about it. Okay? Okay, well, so, now there's a few side notes I want to make to kind of wrap up some other concerns that people might have. So one is, okay, this is our sensor input processing, but of course, so now that we have established that we start here with the input, we have this very, very severe bottleneck here, but then at some point we have to, the system to communicate the output of this here, it needs to go through the output system also what is your behavior, typically the motor system, and this is not trivial. There's very complicated ways to potentially at least to commit a piece of information, to submit a piece of information to words. In this example, you have the Goldberg type of mechanism, of course. When you have one event that is one bit, we pour water here, and in this case it happens to end in one bit here also, push a button to turn on the TV. To turn on the TV, but if you would analyze, and again it's a question of granularity, if you would analyze this whole process here, then that would be many more bits, right? Of all these different parts that move and have different trajectories and all that. So it's again, we would consider that as noise, because the task is turn on TV, and this young boy here has this is a central part of our brain here, has solved this problem by starting this chain of events here. So if you do a detailed analysis of the information contents, the entropy of all these different things here, which will correspond to the muscles that we need to actually push a key on the keyboard, and that involves multiple muscles, the hand and the shoulder and all that has by themselves, they have lots of information. And so there was a paper by people from Case Western, and they are, I think one of them is in the sports physiology or something like that. So they are really focused on the motor system and say, well, this is all wrong because there's way, way, way more information in the motor system alone without even thinking what's a cognitive system, and they're correct, but for this task, it is irrelevant. So we consider this as a noise part. Okay. Now, so I want to go, there's many things to do. Only one thing I want to say, I'm not going to go into detail because of this here, because of the time. So we have a very, very large number. We go from 100 million, or that was only one eye, 2 eyes and all the other things. So we have 100 million to a trillion bits that is reduced to 10. So it's 10 orders of magnitude. So I cite here, I quote Schlenger and Meister, this is maybe the largest unexplained number in brain science. I think it may well be. So just to give you an idea, and then I'll stop with this. So this is not to scale. To scale, this is a Hoover Dam, and you see there's a lot of water coming out. I think it's the largest dam in the US. There's a lot of water coming out of it. And if you do this to scale, then, what did I do? Then, I mean, this is the input, 10 to the 9 bits per second. This is the output, assuming that the motor system is about the same complexity as the sensory system. And in between, we have 10 bits per second. So the the equivalent scale would be this versus sipping from a glass of water going back to the Hoover Dam. So I think this. Anything else? Yeah, right. We talked about this already. Last slide about this. And somebody asked about it. I forgot what it was. So why is that? Why are we limited to 10 bits per second? This seems extremely non-adaptive. I mean, if you play, so another example is it's known that chess players, 10 bits per second, no surprise, and they're really good ones, grandmasters, whatever they are. And when you ask them how do you do it, well, they follow trajectories one by one for a few steps ahead. And there's probably some subconscious view if you've done, I don't know, 1,000 and 1,000, there's some subconscious pre-filtering or something like that. But essentially when they go into details, they do one at a time. And if anybody could do two at a time, they would win every match. They could do 1,000 at a time, 1,000,000 at a time, and we're still not at 100 million. Okay? So why? So one reason it could be, and that was also addressed, could be something like the bacteria follow a chemical gradient, and there's only at one position at a given time, and there's only one direction they can go, so there's no need for that. But that seems, we are no longer bacteria. We can think of many different actions we could take. Why don't we pursue them simultaneously? Okay, I skip over the other two things, and one I marked because this is, I don't want to put words in their mouth. I think it might have to do with working memory, which is common to all of these tasks. But I just want to say, essentially, they don't know, I don't know if anybody knows why we have this extremely severe constraint, but it is there. Okay? And again, if you, I love the criticism because I really want to understand it, what I'm missing here. Okay, now, how much time do I have? Oh, we lost 10 minutes? 5 minutes. Okay. Okay, well, then I skip this part here. This is an experiment that I've done many times. Essentially, what it shows you, well, this is the task that you would be doing. It shows you that there is a fundamental difference between different types of visual input, and that attention is needed to generate a sequential, no, let me rephrase it. Attention is needed in certain types of tasks that are even only slightly more complicated than other tasks that can be done in parallel over the whole field. So you can do parallel processing in your whole visual field, but only for quite limited tasks. Everything else requires a sequential process, which is already a preview, I suppose, of what we are seeing here in the most important part. And this is a quantitative, I'm not going to go into detail, but this is a classic paper, Trees in 1980, Trees and Gelade, which shows the reaction time for those tasks that you can do in parallel, where the reaction time is independent of the number of elements that you have to process, so it's parallel, and it goes linearly with the number of elements that you have to process in those cases where you need attention. And so that is a linear increase with the number of processing of elements to process is a typical example of a sequential serial process. Okay, but we don't have time. Okay. Now, the last few minutes, what can we do? So I'm a computational neuroscientist. I want to make models. I want to make quantitative models, not psychological models, but quantitative models that are testable and falsifiable. So how can we get a grip on this? So how can we understand how attention selects that part that is not to be thrown away? Okay. So this is the idea. The original idea of this is from a paper by Prof. Hopkins in 1995 in a genre, an obscure genre, doesn't exist even anymore. But the paper is really good. And so what they said is, well, first of all, Sophie mentioned top-down attention. This is complicated. It involves memory and your current state. Are you hungry? Are you not hungry? All that. That's complicated to study. But what is a lot easier is bottom-up attention. And what we mean by that is computer scientists would say data-driven. That is only dependent on the instantaneous input that you get. No memory, no state, no nothing. I give you a picture or a video, and whatever attracts your attention in that, independent of context, that is bottom-up attention. Okay? Examples are, I do this. For those people who looked at me, probably paid attention, what is the guy doing there? And that even a monkey would do that. Fast movement, a monkey would react to that. Okay, so that means we can study this in monkeys. People, of course, have done it. Okay, so now what is it? Well, fast movement. The other things, if you have a red dot, a red flower on a red flower, or a loud noise, which we do, a red flower on a green meadow, that will attract attention. Not if you have a field of red flowers, many of them, all the same looking, only if it's different, if you have local differences. Okay? And that applies in other modalities, and so that's something we can do. We know that biological systems use it all the time. It's a center-surround architecture. Center-surround differences make something salient. So for that reason, they call it saliency map. And so the idea was that if you have a map that shows, for example, this gentleman sitting in an orange sweater, that surrounded by 3 people in gray or white, I mean, that person would be conspicuous because it's different. If you want an extreme version of redundancy reduction. Okay, so and so the idea is that if we have a 2-dimensional topographic map of the scene now in front of me, that would stand out, would be a maximum. So it would be a highly salient stimulus compared to the others, which are kind of lower. And so they call this a saliency map. And if that is of any use for this, then what I want to do to find the most attention-worthy part of the scene, I would have to find the maximum of this map. Okay, and that's again a process that biological systems, technical systems do very, very well. The winner-take all have some kind of winner-take all mechanism. And okay, so that's the basic idea, and that was at the time just the idea. We published this idea, and then I was a postdoc with Christoph. And so I took the idea and made it an actual model, computational model, implemented it in C and all that, and then Laurent Gutti, he was smaller than me, he did it in C++. And so this is a model that we developed at the time. And so it's, okay, here we go. So we have the visual input. Then we know that there are feature maps, several feature maps in early visual context. For example, there's a color map. There's certain intensities represented. There's color we have here. There's motion, that's in the next layer in the hierarchy, and so on. And this is just, you can add whatever you want. People have done that, including on search. Kind of texture contrast, as I said, motion and all that. And then, of course, we need to compute center surround. As I said, if everything is red, then nothing is conspicuous, nothing is salient. But if there's one dot that is red and everything is around is green, it has a high value. So we do center surround computation. All of those are at different levels because objects and interesting objects can have different sizes. And they can even have the same size, but when I get closer, they appear larger to me. So they are done at different levels. And then how do I get the saliency map? We do some normalization here. We'll talk about that. And then we get our saliency map by just adding them up, which is less trivial than it sounds, but it actually works surprisingly well. And we do a winner-take-all. Okay, and so example for this scene here, which is a vacation picture of one of my former students, this is the corresponding saliency map. And you can see that, well, I mean, this is high intensity, and there's no motion with it, obviously, but there's high intensity, color contrast, orientation contrast. So this shows up here, and the clouds show up because they have high intensity contrast relative to the surrounding. And so that's why we can understand why this scene here gives why this scene here leads to that saliency map there. Okay? And okay, so we do we find the maximum, and then we find the next highest maximum, and so on. So what we get from that is we get a trajectory. Oh, maybe that's what it is. We get a trajectory, so we start somewhere. This is where the maximum is, and we go to the next highest, and the next highest, and so on. So that this way we scan the scene in the order of decreasing saliency. Of course, if there's something, if it's not a static scene, then something might pop up, and you move to that. So it's more complicated, and we can do the experiments that we never did. We can do with this. Oh yeah, this is important. It turns out that is something we did more than 20 years ago. It turns out that this is the same scene that we saw earlier. What is superposed on this are the eye movements of some observer. So it is systematically with human subjects. And if you look at that, you see two things. First of all, the eye movements are concentrated in the areas of high saliency. They don't look here, which would be here, because there's nothing to see, so they look at the areas of high saliency, which is here. That's the most important part. So the selective attention as computed by this algorithm that I showed you graphically on the previous slide is correlated with the eye movements, which is also called overt attention of the human observers. We did statistics from that and all that. The second part, which is also important, is, well, there's also high points here that nobody looks at, and that is, coming back again to Subi's point, that is because they correspond obviously to the clouds, and nobody looks at them because we don't look at clouds, except if you are, whatever, if you're a meteorologist or something like that, or maybe a pilot, but otherwise clouds are irrelevant, so this is suppressed by the top-down attention system. Okay? So this, of course, is I believe, I don't know if somebody did this too early, I haven't researched it, but I know that this is now now there's many attention models of computational models of selective attention, but they all use the same paradigm. They all use human eye tracking, and they use this to gauge different ways you can do area under the curve and others. Calvin Klein. There's different ways to compare these. The eye tracking, the eye tracks with the saliency map, or whatever output your model generates, but they all use eye movements. Okay. Okay, and then there's variations of that. We are not going to have time on that. This is a fun one. Do you see a military vehicle on it? Good, yeah, very good. So does the algorithm, although the algorithm knows nothing about what a military vehicle is. It's just bottom up. How about this one here? Oh, I skipped one. So this one is more difficult, and actually, you've probably already seen it. So the algorithm finds it, but after many more steps, and so do humans. And it turns out that actually the algorithm is slightly better than humans. And again, without ever, it only knows, this is the original algorithm that I showed you with the three things: orientation, contrast, color contrast, and intensity contrast. No vehicles involved at all. So bottom-up attention is very, very powerful. Okay, the limitations of it, which we don't have time to. Conclusions, I think for the most time I've spent on the hammering down the 10 to the 8 factor of reduction in the bandwidth of the channel by the action of attentional selection. So this I would, for this talk, I would consider this the main take-home message. Of course, in addition to the need, even without knowing that it is 10 to the 8, that we definitely have a very, very strong need for whittling down the amount of information that we can process centrally. But by now, for the first time, possibly, we have an excellent number that we can put inside using the results of the training advisor. Any other questions?